I'm Steve Brulé with Studio Brulé. Recently, Professor Jordan Peterson was attacked on campus at the University of Toronto for his refusal to use new binary gender pronouns. The university had initially approved a public debate about freedom of speech, but prohibited Peterson from repeating his assertion on pronouns, thereby proving Peterson's claim that Bill C-16 is anti-free speech. The university went one step further and instructed Peterson that he would not be allowed to teach in January if he maintained his provocative public stance. The debate has been scrapped and, in an interesting twist, replaced with a forum to be held on Saturday, November 19th at 9:30 a.m. The composition of the forum, though, is worth noting. 3 feminist women, 2 panelists and the moderator, and 1 man who clearly stands for freedom of speech. Really, University of Toronto? This is how you want to represent yourself to the world, by stacking the deck in a university that has already declared its opposition to Peterson and threatened his job? Let's look at the participants. The moderator is Trinity College Provost Mayo Moran. Her bio on Wikipedia states that Moran has published extensively in comparative constitutional law, private law, and legal and feminist theory. That's a quote. That Mayo is a feminist should come as no surprise, since it's practically impossible to advance at a Canadian university unless you are a card-carrying feminist. Panelist Mary Kay Bryson is described on the Social Justice Institute of UBC's website, quote, "Emerging from scholarly engagements with queer and feminist theory, Mary Bryson's program of research contributes significantly to scholarship at the interdisciplinary intersections of critical studies of gender, sexuality, health informatics, and knowledge technologies." The third panelist, Brenda Kosman, is a professor of law and the director of the Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity Studies at the University of Toronto, and her research interests include feminist analysis of law. So there you have it. One panelist, Professor Jordan B. Peterson, who is a clinical psychologist, stands for freedom of speech in opposition to 2 feminist panelists, and one of whom is a law professor, and a feminist moderator who is also a professor of law. Despite this imbalance in favor of the biased feminist narrative, the University of Toronto CUPE 3902 Queer Caucus calls upon all students to boycott this event. This is how stupid the feminists who dominate the university life have become. They oppose even a feminist-dominated discussion of impending legislation, which is Bill C-16 in Canada, just because the panel includes 1 dissenting voice. At every turn, feminists seem determined to prove that Peterson is correct. Feminists are against freedom of speech.
But also because
the choice of a forum focused on law, which is Bill C-16, and the Ontario Human Rights Code, rather than a debate about freedom of speech, is very revealing. This forum will be a discussion about OHRC law and the proposed expansion of this law, not about the moral and ethical issues surrounding freedom of speech.
So the language of Section 1 is that all rights and freedoms contained in the Charter are subject to such reasonable limits as are demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. So, I didn't write those, right? Wasn't me. It was a whole bunch of folks back in the late 70s and the early 1980s, where there was constitutional committees that decided what the Canadian Constitution would be. The Ontario Human Rights Code is a provincial law that protects individuals from discrimination in housing, employment, services, vocational associations, and contracts. It's not constitutional law, which limits government action. It's not criminal law, where the state prosecutes individuals and sends them to jail. It's a type of civil law where private individuals can sue one another. And the remedy is generally damages. The Ontario Human Rights Code was first passed in 1962. It protects people from all kinds of discrimination. It protects people from being fired on the basis of their race, or it protects people from being denied housing on the basis of their religion, or it protects people from being called
The result of this clever debate sidestepping forum is predictable. The law is legal, of course, that's the definition of the law. And changes to the law are legal. That's what legislators do. And as so many previous SJW protesters have claimed, quote, human rights are not up for debate. But what they really mean, of course, is that no opposition to the codification of feminist ideology into law will be tolerated. This forum is a show of force by the university and an attempt to embarrass Peterson, who will be corralled into a conversation about the law as it is, and away from the incredibly important philosophical debate on the ethical implications of restricting the citizen's right to freedom of expression.
I think they'll probably come after my clinical license. So that'd be my guess. So
I think we might be straying a little away from
Yeah.
the question now. So just thank you.
no, we're not, because that question involved my clinical practice. I'm not straying a bit. That involved my clinical practice, and there was a reason that the question was posed. So I'm not straying.
Thank you.
Freedom of speech is not protected, really, under Canadian law, it seems. Peterson has already made his point that the SJWs and Bill C-16 will be used to shut down freedom of speech.
I have, in fact, been denounced today. And what I am saying has, in fact, been described as hate propaganda. So one thing I'd like to suggest to you, every single person in the audience, you're next. So keep it in mind. So I'm going to read you something that a graduate student sent me from the University of Toronto the other day, and I can also tell you that I've received hundreds of letters like this. Today, I had a tutorial at the University of Toronto where I talked about Jordan Peterson and issues of personal identity, legally sanctioned identity categories, etc. I brought up a video of a tall white man in his 30s who asked students at a university how they'd react if he told them he identified as a woman, as black, as short, and as 5 years old. Spoiler alert. Students in the video resist some of the later categories a bit, but are mostly accepting. Still, students were not engaging in discussion. I asked them why. One said it was because she was worried to share her opinion for fear of being singled out or saying something offensive. I asked who else was not speaking for that reason. The whole class put their hands up. That was shocking to me. I encouraged them to speak despite their worries, and they gave me some good feedback on how to make it easier for them to do so. For instance, by working in pairs and being assigned an opinion so that they didn't have to be responsible for it or feel bad for defending it. No participation. Why? They weren't uninterested. They were afraid to speak their minds. The PC police are in your heads.
Canadians will continue to lose freedoms until we rid ourselves of feminist domination. The levers of feminist power are craftily concocted in academia by creating false studies and elaborately rationalized lies like the wage gap and, quote, rape culture, which are disseminated through society by taxpayer-funded and feminist-dominated groups like Status of Women Canada, Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, LEAF for short, the Elizabeth Fry Society, and many, many more who hire and promote the feminist ideologues trained by the University of Toronto and every one of the institutions of higher indoctrination in Canada. In the US, they have similar organizations like National Organizations for Women. Canadians need to treat feminism like any other ideological group. Feminism is, however, anti-intellectual, anti-freedom, and anti-equality. It has no place in any institution devoted to higher education, specifically because it seeks to repress the truth by enforcing adherence to its ideological biases, and it has succeeded in corrupting Canadian law to the detriment of all Canadians.